This in a way is not only things that I have learned in my past 27 years of life, but particularly things that I have learned in the past 3 years of life. Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you don't know me, my name is Nina. I'm a certified life coach. On this channel, I talk about coaching related things, health and chronic illness related things, as well as general personal development related things. Now, this channel is relatively new, but I've had other YouTube channels in the past, different iterations of said YouTube channels in the past, and about 3 years ago, I posted a video called 24 Things I've Learned at 24. Sort of like a popular video topic at the time. Certainly wasn't my original creative idea, but over the past 3 years I've done a lot of learning and growing, that's for sure. 2021, which is when I was 24, was one of the most difficult years of my life. In that video, I'm putting on like a happy, smiley face, but my life was not happy and smiley at all behind the scenes. So I was sort of like inspired to do another video, 27 things that I've learned at 27, now that I'm coming up on my 27th birthday. Since I feel like I've evolved so much over the past 3 years, I wanted to do it in a bit of a different way, where I react to this video that is private on my astrology channel, see what I had to say about the things that I had learned at 24, perhaps amend some of the things that I have to correct about the things that I say in the video, things that I don't necessarily agree with anymore, clarify a little bit more perhaps of what I was saying in that video, and of course fill in the gaps, right? If there's anything here that I still agree with and I thumbs up, that counts towards my 27 things that I've learned at 27. If there's anything that I'm scratching out, I'll replace it with something new. And then of course, there are 3 brand new bullet points, brand new things that I've learned to get to that final sum of 27 things that I've learned at 27 years old. I have not watched this video in 3 years since I probably edited and posted it. I privated it just out of a hunch that I probably wouldn't like that stuff to be out on the internet anymore. So I'm not necessarily super jazzed about watching myself back, but it should be interesting. So let's get into it. Happy birthday to me. Here are some things I've learned in the time that I've been alive. I wanted to celebrate my birthday in a little small way on this channel, and this is a style of video that I've seen other people do. I think that it's a nice, cozy, chatty video, and I wanted to have some life chats with you guys today through the form of talking about 24 things I've learned in my now 24 years of life. Starting with the number 1 thing on this list of things I've learned, and that is life gets easier when you stop taking things personally. Okay, that was definitely me in the 4 agreements era. In concept, definitely, I think that that's a good principle, that there are plenty of times where it's not necessary to take things personally. Let's see what else I have to say on the subject. Not necessarily an easy thing right off the bat to just not take things personally, but the thing is, life does get easier when you don't take things personally. You know, I'm someone who can be quite sensitive, and growing up performing my whole life, I've encountered a lot of characters who take critique and direction and comments about them very personally, and it's just not productive to do that, even though it's something that's easier said than done. When it comes to other people's perspectives of you, that's it. It's just their perspective, and everyone's perspective is tinged with their own way of seeing the world. Someone's opinion of me could really shake me up, but it's important to remember that that's not the be-all end-all, and at the end of the day, if you want to make your life easier, try not to take things personally. Okay, yeah, that mindset definitely served me in that phase of life that I was in then. I talked about like, oh, I've performed my whole life, and you take a lot of critique, you take a lot of notes, how you can do better. I had been in artistic performing arts spaces where people were just like unnecessarily mean, unnecessarily like unhinged with the way that they would talk about me, extremely inappropriate at times with the way that they would talk about me. And I also interpersonally, I think that I had to take the mindset in order to survive that, like, when people said really awful, horrible, mean things about me, I needed some sort of barrier to block that from affecting me. I say over and over again, it is easier said than done. That's for heckin' sure. And I don't think that at this point in my life, I had like found the like spiritual total non-attachment to the things that people would say about me. In hindsight, I know that what would have been more productive for me would have been, instead of adjusting my behavior and adjusting my mindset of like, okay, people are gonna say mean things in these several environments that I am in extremely frequently, to make a judgment on, hey, these things that people say about me are not okay to say, and I don't need to tolerate that. I don't need to adjust my mindset. I don't need to adjust like what's going on in my head. I need to adjust like what I am surrounded by, So in principle, definitely agree that not taking things personally can be a really good tool in your arsenal. I say specifically here that things get easier when you stop taking things personally. I say that it's not productive to take criticism personally when someone is trying to help you and artistically make you grow or whatever. But I was doing like a lot of discounting, a lot of ignoring about the mean things that people would say in my personal life. And I think the only time that you should discount and ignore the things that people say is when they aren't important people in your life, when they aren't big influences in your life. And I actually have a video that I posted over the 12 days of Wellnessmas that I think tackles the principle of not taking things personally a little bit better. Number 2 on this list is consider the source. So obviously this is relevant when you are studying up on something, when you're trying to learn about a certain topic. You want to look at the sources that you're educating yourself with and see if they are reliable and where they're getting their information from and all of that stuff. It's so interesting that I sort of like brushed off, oh, it's important to check your sources, make sure that you're getting your information from a reliable source, this, that, whatever. I do not feel like I, up until recently, have been really serious about, heeding that wisdom. I definitely in the past had this tendency to pretty much take things at face value. If someone would say something with enough authority, I would assume that they knew what they were talking about, right? And so I went down a path of like believing a whole bunch of nonsense, really. Yeah, I definitely was not discerning with my sources at this stage of life. But on top of that, I kind of wrote this down thinking about how I used to always ask for advice from other people. And I used to really have this kind of default setting to just automatically look up to people and assume that they're better than me. I think that's also a social anxiety thing. And so a lot of times I would take other people's advice when it wasn't necessarily the right thing to do. Dear 24-year-old Nina, you have not grown out of that. You still have that default setting. And right now you're developing some awareness around that, but it takes time to really unlearn that. And that's just because people can only give advice from their own perspective. A lot of times when people are telling you what to do, they're telling you what they would do based on their own life experiences, based on what they want out of the situation. You're asking relationship advice from somebody. Consider the source as far as their values, what they want out of a relationship. Maybe they have a different opinion on your partner or prospective partner than you have on your partner because they are not as compatible with that person as you are. So yeah, this is definitely a nugget of wisdom, if you will, that I had fully synthesized at this point in my life. And it's funny because at this time I was in an abusive relationship. And so I'm talking about like, oh, don't listen to the advice that other people have to say to you about your relationship, consider the source. And it's funny because I know exactly what I'm referencing here. And that was when I asked a friend some advice on the relationship that I was in. And the advice just was really bad advice. I can say that here, 27 years old, knowing that I was in an abusive relationship at this time. And I can still say that the advice that I received was really, really bad advice because it had nothing to do with my situation. It was basically just the person talking about literally themselves, pretending like it was advice towards me. It was, should I just say, it was like, no. It was just completely irrelevant advice. But also consider the source. If this is someone who has good intentions and who is being unbiased, then also don't think like, oh, well, they're just a hater and they don't know what they're talking about. But from my perspective, from my experience, what was important for me to learn was that the fact is, not everyone knows better than you do, Nina. And other people's way of living their life isn't better than your way of living your life. Completely agree with everything that I'm saying here. In fact, I have a video on my channel now about 7 reasons why I don't give advice as a life coach. This bullet point is more than just saying like, don't take advice. It's saying like, consider the source. Sometimes people are really knowledgeable about you, they really care about you, and they actually have good insight into the situation. So that, again, isn't a point where you just want to say, oh, they're just a hater. So yeah, that's a really great point, Nina. The third thing on this list is if your intentions are kind and pure, there is no reason to blame yourself for hurting somebody else's feelings. Yeah, where was I coming from with this? I have had people in my life, and this was particularly acute at this point in my life, where I had people who were just very, very selfish. We're not into like actually having a mutual relationship, 50-50 relationship with me. And there were so many instances where I would finally pluck up the courage to express my feelings of discontentment, express my feelings of hurt, and really like ask for something out of someone that I was in a close interpersonal relationship with, and it was not received well. It was seen as an attack. And the sort of conclusion of that conversation, according to the other person, would be that I was a bad guy and that I had hurt their feelings and I had done something wrong for bringing up my feelings. And here I say, like, as long as you are pure intentioned and coming from a good place, then it's not your fault that you're hurting somebody else's feelings. And I will tell you that I only ever approached anyone ever, but especially these kinds of people, extremely meekly, extremely tactfully, extremely carefully. And so it was hard to deal with, like, me doing my best to like come to someone with my feelings in a gentle way, to then be told that I was a selfish, manipulative, whatever person. That was something that I was really, really struggling with at the time. And I'll be honest that my reaction to when I do have to express my feelings, and I know that that might not please the person to whom I'm expressing those feelings to, I regress to that place of like, oh my God, this person might literally like hurt themselves because of me saying something. And it's still a huge hurdle to jump over to accept that it is not my fault if I do the best that I can to approach someone in the kindest way if they still don't receive that well. And I was listening to Glennon Doyle's podcast, and I wish that I remember what episode, because I wish that I remember what guest had said this, so I will make sure to put it here in post. But it was a really powerful phrase that I've taken with me, and that is that if someone doesn't want to understand you, it doesn't matter what you say. If someone wants to understand you, it doesn't matter how you say it. I have had a history of just walking on eggshells with people that I'm trying to communicate with, trying to make sure that I'm not saying the wrong thing and that my intentions come across. And it was such a relief to hear that saying, that if someone really wants to understand you, they'll go along with you. You can't say the wrong thing because they'll be with you on the journey to understand your intention, to understand your heart. And it is just a waste of time to try at all to communicate with someone sometimes if they are dead set on not wanting to understand you. Of course, remorse is natural, but I am someone who will sometimes withhold myself, withhold expressing myself, withhold taking certain actions if I feel like it is going to upset or hurt another person. And sometimes that means that I would put other people's happiness and well-being above my own just to avoid hurting them, because that feeling of hurting someone, that feeling of upsetting someone is something so unpleasant to me that I will avoid it at all costs, and I will take other unpleasant emotions that are actually a lot more long-lasting than briefly upsetting someone. What's really like hitting me about watching this back is I'm impressed, and I didn't expect to see this much self-awareness around these things that I have awareness of now, because I feel like, you know, I'm new in the process of healing these particular things. And so I'm surprised that I was aware of them to this extent all the way back then. And it's really making me think about how important the two pillars of change and healing are, which are awareness and corrective experience. Because here at this point in my life, I am demonstrating the awareness, but I am not in a position where I'm having corrective relational experiences. I'm still in relationship with the people in my life at the time who would add fuel to the fire around these behavior patterns that I had. And so it still took another year and a bit at this point for me to actually initiate the process of healing like people-pleasing patterns, these boundary wounds, because as much awareness as I seem to have had at the time, I was still entrenched in an environment that supported and reinforced those patterns. And number 4 is the blame game gets you nowhere. And this is something that I actually have a vivid memory of learning quite early on, at least like when I was around 12, 13 in the 7th grade. I remember this.
I went out to West Virginia to do this team building exercise. It was quite a small class. It was only like 10, 13 people. And so we did these team building like obstacle courses, and one of them, basically the moral of the story, was the blame game gets you nowhere, because we were all doing something as a team, and if one person messed up, we as 12-year-olds would turn on that person and be like, oh, why did you mess up? You suck. And that was not beneficial to the teen. That was not beneficial in moving forward.
Yeah, I still remember doing that obstacle course, and I remember like it was a core memory, like a really important like character building moment where as a team most of us like just clicked into the realization that in order to get this obstacle course done, we had to work together as a team. We couldn't blame the person who messed up, whatever. So yeah, and it's interesting. This is something that I learned like immediately at that moment at 12 years old. Teenager and preteen and children brains are so plastic. It's amazing because throughout my life in adult relationships, this is something that I have stayed the course on, is I am not of the style where in any conflict I will find the need to resort to blaming. I'm always there for the win-win. And I, at this point, would strive and strive and strive for the win-win to avoid the blaming, but I had big-time blamers in my life.
Number 5 is grace for others starts with grace for yourself. I'm sure you've heard that RuPaul quote of, if you don't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love anyone else? And that is so true. But I think that a lot of times the way that we translate that phrase is with this attitude of like, you need to have a very high bar for yourself. And of course, you should. You shouldn't let people into your life that are abusive, that are just not compatible with you, all of that sort of stuff. But sometimes we place the bar so high for other people that we end up accepting nothing less than perfect. And obviously perfect doesn't exist. And when we put the bar so high for other people, like we can't accept someone into our life who has the smallest little flaw, who doesn't check off everything in our perfect man, perfect woman, perfect best friend, perfect dog even checklist, it's a reflection of the fact that we don't think we're worthy if we don't measure up to a certain level. So the more forgiving that we can be towards others, the more we can teach ourselves that we also deserve forgiveness.
Wow. I'm really not sure that that is true, given my lived experience. It's ironic because I'm saying, you know, of course, you shouldn't accept abusive people into your life, but I was doing exactly that at this point. So, of course, in theory, you know, we can't expect someone to be perfect and not have any flaws, and we're not going to, you know, be in a relationship with anyone who is less than perfect. Obviously, like that is true in theory, but what I am doing here is I am justifying my decision to have someone in my life who is extremely problematic and abusive. And that's the kind of stuff that you will do to yourself when you're in an abusive relationship, is you will say these perfectly logical things, like, of course it is true that you can't expect anyone to be perfect in a relationship, but you will apply it in such a way that doesn't make sense. Because the fact is, I wasn't just with someone who, like, what's an example of a way that someone is imperfect? Like, you know, if your partner says, don't worry about it, you cooked, I'm gonna do the dishes, I'm just gonna do it later, and then like 24 hours pass and the dishes still aren't done, and then it's like, well, damn, now I have to do the dishes before I can cook again, you know? That is an example of how sometimes a partner is not perfect. The examples of how my partner at the time was not perfect, it's not a case of less than perfect. It is a case of extremely problematic and abusive. Like, it breaks my heart to hear myself talk like that, to hear the justification that I'm doing in my head at this point. And since I brought up the RuPaul quote, you know, if you don't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love anyone else? I more recently, a couple years maybe at this point already, heard Dr. Honda say that maybe a more accurate version of that quote is, if someone else doesn't love you, then how the hell are you going to love anyone else? Which very much goes against like this sort of culture that we have of being very independent and like, I don't need anybody, I can do everything on my own, I love myself, don't need anyone else. But from a developmental perspective, if we grow up without having and experiencing love from our attachment figures, that is what impedes us from being able to love ourselves.
The more we can give unconditional love to other people, the more we can understand that we deserve unconditional love, and the more we can unconditionally love ourselves.
I wish that was true. I wish it was just that simple. But unfortunately, I had the mindset of being so unconditionally loving that I wasn't discerning of the people whom I would allow in my life. And it just doesn't work to be unconditionally loving to someone who berates you and belittles you and judges you on an everyday basis. No amount of unconditional love that you give to that person will be able to send the message to yourself that you are deserving of unconditional love. No amount of that is going to be strong enough to overcome, the abuse from that person to tell you that you're actually deserving of unconditional love. If that were the case, then you would make the decision to unconditionally love that person from afar and not continue to make plans to spend your life with them.
Number 6 on this list is that there are 2 ways to face hardship in life: with complaints and without complaints. Now, a caveat to this sort of life lesson is also everything in moderation. I definitely don't condone biting your tongue and swallowing your feelings when you need to express a fair, decent, healthy amount of complaints in your life, but I used to be someone who had a really big problem with complaining. I would complain too much. I did this a lot in like my early years in high school, but it's definitely not a habit that I kicked to the curb in one foul swoop. But I do remember that one of my high school teachers, when I was like a freshman, said something to the effect of this: you could complain or you could also not, and neither route will make a difference, really.
That's so funny. I did used to be a huge complainer in like middle school and high school, and that piece of advice that I got from my high school math teacher of saying, you can complain about this or you could not, it's still going to have the same effect. You're still going to have to do the homework. That is not applicable to all real world scenarios. That is definitely applicable to situations where you cannot control the outcome, which is the case like if you want to do your homework or you don't want to do your homework, there's nothing you can do about it. So you might as well just not spend your calories complaining about it. But say in a relationship, you have the decision if you want to be in that relationship or if you don't want to be. But my mindset here in this moment was that I should just not complain because my complaints weren't doing anything to move the needle in what I was experiencing in that relationship. I wasn't expecting this to so be around this topic, but I guess that's what I was going through at the time. So yeah, I guess like, sure, in principle, no matter what situation you're in, you're going to make it easier on yourself in terms of getting through and enduring that situation by not complaining. But there is a reason why we need to acknowledge and voice our complaints at times. And that's when things are genuinely not fair and we need to change the course of the situation. And in fact, wouldn't you know it, I have a video sort of discussing that more in depth. It's my video on anger and what I'm learning about anger.
Number 7 on the list of things that I've learned is the concept that just because the world doesn't honor a quality of yours doesn't mean that that quality is not honorable. Or just the thought that things go in and out of style all the time. This has to do with obviously physical qualities. You know, big hips and big butts were in style when Marilyn Monroe was the beauty icon. Then when Paris Hilton was the beauty icon, it was all about skinny bitches. No matter what you look like, appearances go in and out of style all the time. And just because society isn't honoring the way that you look doesn't mean that you are not honorable. Beyond that, I also think about this in terms of personality traits, character qualities.
Yes, I like this. This can stay. Definitely, like appearance-wise, physicality-wise, that is something to keep in mind when we are scrolling through the internet or whatever, and we're seeing what is in style, what's not in style, how that reflects our body, how we might feel that that might be commenting negatively on our body because our body doesn't match that. So this is a lot about like reminding yourself to internally validate because external validation is fickle. And also, like in terms of qualities, you know, I am a very sensitive person, have always been a very sensitive person. That makes the world at large not really built for me and my nervous system necessarily. So actually an interesting book that sort of talks about this topic that I don't think that I had read at the time, maybe I already had, is The Highly Sensitive Person by Elaine Aron. And she talks about particularly how sensitive qualities associated with highly sensitive people are more held up and bolstered and idealized in different Oriental cultures. So that's something interesting that reflects this point that I'm making here.
Number 8 is about an attitude that I had to develop in my period of self-work and self-growth. And that is, it is not worth waiting for perfection if that means that your life goes unlived. And there is only so much growth that you can accomplish on your own. There's this very healthy, very honorable narrative that we have of you need to love yourself, you need to work on yourself before you get into a relationship. Make sure that you know how to be independent before you know that you're ready to be interdependent with someone else. Know yourself, work on yourself, yada yada yada, in order to be ready for a relationship. But as someone who has a hard time with gray areas, I guess I'm an ENFJ.
I'm actually an INFJ. I don't know if it was the pandemic or my chronic illness, but I used to think that I was an extrovert, and I'm definitely an introvert. I think I always was, but definitely now.
And that J part of me very much likes things to be black and white. And so when I was in this mindset of like, okay, I really need to work on myself, I need to put my nose to the grindstone, make sure that I know myself, that I can be independent, yada yada yada. There was a point where I was scared to sort of integrate into society, you know, develop relationships with other people, because at the end of the day, it's hard for you to feel perfect because we're not meant to be perfect. So it's not worth waiting for perfection if that means that you don't get to actually live your life. On top of that, there is only so much growth that we can do spending time by ourselves. So much of the lessons that we learn come from our relationships with other people. At least that has definitely been the experience in my life.
Yeah, this definitely is a myth that I still see getting perpetuated, is people avoiding relationships because they feel like they need to have worked on all of these other things and essentially be perfect in order to get into a relationship. And definitely it's like a good idea to make sure that you are not going into pursuing romantic relationships completely unprepared and without any self-awareness, self-knowledge, self-study, whatever. But yeah, I definitely still see this sort of energy in people if they lean more into an avoidant attachment style. Maybe they're just looking for excuses to keep themselves in that comfort zone. But there is so much to learn in interpersonal and romantic relationships. I always had this mindset of like, I was always looking for my forever partner. I just wanted to find the one. I wanted to find my person. That was always like what was driving me to date. Sometimes I would feel like stuck in a relationship because I just wanted to get there. I wanted to get to that destination. And if I had sort of taken my own advice of like using relationships to grow and to learn, and as part of the journey instead of the destination, I might have fared differently. Let's just say that.
Number 9 also goes along with sort of relationship lessons that I have learned. And that is make room for other people's insecurities. This kind of harkens back to the idea of having a checklist, only accepting someone in your life if they check off all of the boxes on your checklist. In relationships, we have to make room for other people's insecurities. I heard this from some sort of TED Talk or some sort of book somewhere, and I can't remember, but I didn't come up with this on my own. But it's a really good way of phrasing it. Just like we make room in our schedules, we give ourselves buffer time if things go wrong, if we can't find a parking spot, something like that. We need to make room for our partner's insecurities in a relationship, for our partner's less than admirable qualities, so that we don't get frustrated when those things come up, when their insecurities come up. And it doesn't feel like so much of a snag in the road or whatever. Give them space to talk about those things. Confide in you about those things.
Yeah, interesting. I think that I see like on Instagram and stuff, advice on relationships, sort of around these lines in general of what I'm talking about, like, oh, your partner isn't perfect and blah, 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 da, da, da. And like the disclaimer always in the caption is like, this doesn't apply to abusive relationships though. And you know, I could say the very same thing about this concept that you need to make room for other people's insecurities. Doesn't apply to abusive relationships, doesn't apply in the context that I'm applying this to in my life at the time. An insecurity that would come up, you know, at the beginning of my relationship with my boyfriend now is if there was ever, you know, a quality that would come up that was less than perfect, right? I would get a little fearful of, you know, if that would be a pattern, if that was like a red flag, you know, that meant that I was going to involve myself in someone who was similar to my ex. And it never was. My boyfriend is the most supportive, amazing, just my best friend, such an incredible partner. And what I came to realize was important when discerning whether a less than perfect quality was something to make room for, an insecurity to make room for, or something that would spell trouble, that might be a red flag, was the context of when these insecurities or when these like less than perfect qualities would come out. With my ex, the drop of a hat would send him into a spiral of anger. Like I was always on pins and needles, on eggshells. There was always the fear and the hypervigilance around the things that would make him angry, and pretty much anything would. And there was never an off button to that. There was never an off switch to that. And that's not the case for all people who are abusive. But when I would see, you know, my boyfriend now get a little agitated or yeah, pretty much just that, like get a little agitated, it would make a huge difference to notice like what was making him agitated was an extreme like pressure cooker stressor, and the agitation was not a long-lasting personality trait. It was something very appropriate and very proportional to the stressor that he was encountering. Like my ex was a huge like road rager. Any little like thing on the road would set him off in like a disproportionate, inappropriate way, like following people who like cut him off and stuff, and yelling and honking, and like even if he wasn't reacting, you know, aggressively to the person, he would be in the car like still yelling these obscenities, and like for minutes after the incident would be like saying really, really awful things about this person whom he had like a 3-second stressful interaction with. And a couple months ago, me and my boyfriend now went on an 11-hour road trip. It was bad weather conditions. It was foggy. He did all of the driving. I didn't do any driving. I was not a reliable navigator, anything like that. And in only like the last 10 minutes of that whole drive did he have like even an eye roll moment where it was basically like, oh really? You're gonna have your hazards on at this point? Now it's only drizzling. We've gone through fog and rain and whatever, but now we get here and this person has their hazards lights on? Come on. So yes, make room for other people's insecurities. Make room for people not having their brightest moments all the time, but be cognizant of how much of those insecurities might actually be a problem to your relationship, might actually be a problem to your partner, how much of that consumes their personality and makes them generally destructive. You also can't help everyone. You just can't. There are some people who, maybe because of personality issues, are just very, very difficult to help. There are some people who don't want help, who don't care for it, who don't need that from you. And it's not your responsibility in that case.
Number 10 is you never know what's going to happen. Why I think this is a relevant life lesson to bring up here is that this is an astrology channel, and astrology is a tool that sometimes lends itself to predictions or lends itself to us making assumptions about others before they prove our assumptions right. I think that a lot of our anxieties can come from assuming, future tripping. Astrology and spirituality can sometimes lend itself to enabling our anxiety. Sometimes you can use astrology to look into the future and make some scary predictions. But it's always important to remember that no matter how many tools we have, we never truly know what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, completely. No notes. Definitely before I open my eyes to all of the issues and gripes that I have now with the spiritual community and the spiritual industry, the first sort of set of them were around this unease that I had, this issue that I had with what, you know, trying to predict things through astrology could do to us and do to our anxiety.
Number 11 sort of goes along with this sentiment. And it's this phrase that is basically the only thing that you can possibly know for sure is that you know nothing. It's something that really took a long time for me to fully digest, but after some time and years and digestion, that's something that I've learned.
Yeah, that's definitely much more of a philosophical point than it is a practical one. You know, practically there are tons of things that we know, but even the things that we know and that are proven can be disproven. There's always room to learn more. There's always room to adjust what we know. And at the root of everything, there's nothing that we can know for certain when it comes to a lot of things. We can only do the best with what we know how. It's an important thing to keep in mind, I think, really, because there are people out there who have something to gain from you thinking that they know it all about something or other. They're usually selling something to you, so they want you to know that they know this one true secret. That's something that I now consider a red flag in anyone who really acts like they know it all about anything. You need to have room for what you don't know.
Number 12 is love is a verb. This comes directly from Stephen R. Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This is an idea that was brought up a couple of times within the context of his book. And again, it's something that I have been chewing on and that really makes a whole lot of sense. It really wasn't something that nestled itself in my brain the way it has now until I was like 23. And in my years of life, and also as someone who enjoys watching The Bachelor, I hear a lot of people say, you know, I used to think that I was in love. I thought that I was in love, but now I look back on that and I don't think that was love. And so I guess I've never been in love because I thought that was love, but it wasn't love. And I think that what they're talking about is love as the feeling, you know? Maybe they thought that they felt true, deep love, but with enough hindsight, they realized that that was infatuation. And those are some of the trappings that we get into when we define love solely as a feeling. We suddenly, with some distance and separation from our experiences, have difficulty quantifying whether we have been in love, were in love, are in love anymore. But when we look at love as a verb, it's much easier to identify, define. It's the idea that if you treat someone with love, if you act towards someone with love, with kindness, with them in mind, if you care about someone deeply and your actions reflect that, then that is love.
Yeah, I don't think that Stephen R. Covey really had the same thing in mind as I did at this moment. At this point in my life, I didn't know if I was in love, but I wanted to be. I wanted to be in love. This video is just seems to be an amalgamation of examples of confirmation bias on my point, wanting to justify the relationship that I was in and looking for any evidence and skewing it in any way that would confirm the ultimate outcome that I wanted. That was, it's okay for me to be in this relationship. Yeah, because I didn't have that love feeling for the person that I was with. The only love that I could identify in that relationship was the act of behaving lovingly and forgivingly and compassionately and patiently to the person that I was with at the time. So that was me justifying, oh, okay, I am in love. This is love. This is love. Okay. And it would put my mind at ease, but it wasn't love. And I don't think that's what Stephen R. Covey had in mind when he said love is a verb. So I would say instead of love is a verb, is that love is more than a feeling. There's a song like that, isn't there? More than a feeling. Love is more than a feeling. It is a plethora of things, including the verb of loving someone, of taking the action of being loving towards them, of acting towards them with love, with compassion, with patience, with kindness, with them in mind, all of those things that I said.
Number 13 is that there is value to absolutely everything. You know, every cloud has a silver lining. I think that this phrase, there is value to everything, sits a little easier than everything happens for a reason. When you take that phrase in the context of, you know, death and war and a global pandemic, it can be a little depressing. But to instead take the perspective that there is value to absolutely everything I think makes things a little less black and white, while still being able to understand that throughout any hardship, throughout any difficult situation, there is value in that. Whether there is a lesson there, or whether one tough situation is just a domino for a series of much more fortunate events that wouldn't have been able to happen without that flap of a butterfly's wing.
I like that. I like moving away from the phrase that everything happens for a reason, because I don't really jive with that. Not really because of the reasons that I state here, but I don't think that everything happens for a reason, but I do think that there is value in everything, and I think that we can assign a purpose for everything that happens. The reason why currently I don't love everything happens for a reason is because of the sort of like omnipotent power that it seems to denote, that everything that is going on in the world has happened because it was said to be so for a reason, because of a preordained power. It's not that I don't believe in higher power, but I like the idea that we are more powerful than I definitely in the past believed myself to be. And so instead of thinking of something as, oh, that had to happen for this reason, I like framing it as we can find a reason why this was valuable. We just need to concern ourselves with what the reality is and how we can make the most of it, how we can reconcile with it, how we can make meaning of it, how we can find purpose behind it. So therefore, we're not even so much judging things as good or bad. We're just looking at what the value is in it.
And number 14 is that everyone has their own path. Advice is not one size fits all. And this is sort of the flip of the coin of the number 2 lesson on this list, consider the source. When it comes to taking advice, you need to consider the source. You need to consider whether their advice is in line with your path. And then when it comes to giving advice, you also need to give it lightly. You can't invest too much in your ideas for somebody else's path, because it is their own path. This is something that I've learned, as someone who is very passionate about the things that I am passionate about, i.e. astrology and veganism, These are 2 things that have helped my life tremendously. So naturally, I would think that if they came into the lives of other people, they would be able to experience the growth, the transformation, the benefits of having these things in their life. So, I used to think like, oh, everyone just needs astrology. If people were open-minded to astrology, if they would just look up their chart, if they would just understand, astrology is the answer. But there's no point in trying to force someone to follow the same path as me. I discovered astrology when I needed to discover it. I discovered veganism when I needed to discover it. And those things fit with me. Those things are right for me. Maybe they're not right for every single person in the whole wide world. And that's important to remember, that just because my experience with something is so positive doesn't mean that it is going to be for someone else. Or even if it is going to be that for someone else, there's no point in me trying to force them onto that path.
That's really nice. It's really nice to hear past me say that. It's evocative of a IPEC foundational principle, which is everyone's unique path is as important as anyone else's. What I talk about a lot here is, making room for the fact that not everyone is going to jive with the things that help you in the same way, that you can't force your advice or your life path on anybody else. I like that, co-sign that. But also, it's so easy to judge people who have just different stories than us, who are at different points of growth, different obstacles, maybe have more obstacles to overcome, maybe haven't done as much work to overcome certain obstacles, whatever. It's so easy to judge other people and so easy to put yourself in that hierarchy above at least certain other people, as much as it is easy to put ourselves in a hierarchy below other people that we are jealous of or who make us feel insecure about ourselves, right? I think that's just very, very normal. And the principle that everybody's unique journey is as important as anyone else's can really break us out of that tendency in one direction or another, to be able to say, you know what, this person is dealing with a lot of things that I personally would never put myself through. This person has all of these qualities that I don't value, that I have overcome maybe, but you know what, they're on their journey. Their life has had its own unique set of circumstances and they're going in their own unique direction. Who am I to say what they need to do or who they need to be? And again, oh, this person has all of these things that I'm jealous of or whatever, but my path is just as important. Neither one is better or worse.
Similarly, number 15 here is that everyone is human. The reason why I think that this is a relevant life lesson is that, especially in the spiritual realm, we tend to put people on pedestals. We tend to believe that other people have an answer or have some sort of savvy that makes them better than you. But everyone is human.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm sort of kind of like repeating what I just said here, but with the added like takeaway that everyone is human. People in the spiritual industry or spiritual community are not greater than or not above anyone else, blah, blah, blah. But I think that actually what I would say, instead of everybody is human and that no one is like this spiritual superior, is that everyone contains the multitudes of the universe in themselves. Everyone is made up of the same stuff as stars, and still no one is better than anyone else, no matter how much they seemingly in their identity, in the way that they dress, or in the things that they're interested in, may or may not be acting more out of that spirituality. Everyone is a spiritual being, even if spirituality doesn't always mean incense and crystals and tarot cards and astrology. Spirituality exists everywhere and it exists in all of us.
Sometimes discernment is greater than achievement. Sometimes discerning what is right for you to do, even if it doesn't look as good in the eyes of someone else in terms of how successful it will make you look, is more important than checking off a box. It sounds really deep, but the reason why I even put this on this list is because I've been having a really hard time mentally, and I haven't been able to do what I'm normally able to do in terms of fitness. And sure, doing a sweaty sculpting workout, it would seem like more of an achievement, but it was important for me to discern that a nice, slow stretching sequence was what I needed to do, even though it wouldn't necessarily rank as high of an achievement.
Yeah, I was going through a really hard time mentally. Now, discernment is greater than achievement. I think it's a matter of like reframing what achievement is. Like, to me, in that moment where I was like, I'm gonna listen to my body and like do a little stretching sequence instead of doing a weighted workout, whatever sculpting session, whatever I said it was, that was an achievement in itself. So how would I reframe this? What would be my replacement for this lesson here? I guess like achievement is more about the internal satisfaction rather than the external satisfaction. Something that would have, in my mind, made doing a sculpt workout class on a greater hierarchy than a chill, stretchy yoga sequence was a social construct, right? That this is better than that. Because what's more valued in society is to work hard and have a good body and get into these certain heart rate zones or whatever. And it had nothing to do with like what personally was best for me at the time. You know, I wasn't in a position where I necessarily needed to be doing daily cardio exercise or anything like that. In fact, I was very much in a period of time where I needed to take measures to regulate my nervous system and like de-stress. But it was the external rubric, if you will, of what is constituted as a higher achievement that was driving my outlook on the situation rather than my internal rubric, if you will, of what would be considered an achievement or a win.
Number 17, I'll keep brief. It's just that patience and tolerance are underrated virtues. I think those are just two qualities that are lacking in the dominating social narratives.
Yeah, this was actually one that I had remembered that I had put in this video, patience and tolerance. Actually, I hadn't remembered patience. I remember that I had said tolerance was like something that the world needed more of. And yeah, 2021, super divided political landscape. 2024, equally, if not more so. I would say personally in my life, the most important players in my life at the time were extremely intolerant and hateful people, to be perfectly blunt. And I could have stood to be a little less patient and a little less tolerant.
Number 18, I put down here, even though I'm still learning, and that is don't rush. You're exactly where you need to be. I think in a year that has been so slow moving and really void of opportunities, it can feel really stressful to think that you're not progressing in terms of your dreams, your goals, your career, your life experiences. But at the same time, there is value in everything. And there are silver linings to be had in this situation of pressing pause. And so I'm kind of coming to terms with this idea that you can't rush, and maybe where you are is exactly where you need to be.
Yeah, at this point in my life, I was feeling time ticking. I was feeling that pressure to have everything figured out, and I couldn't even admit to myself how much I did not have most things figured out. So it's accurate to say that I was still learning when it came to this, and it's definitely something that I have settled into much more. I look back on the past 3 years of my life, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, and I'm not regretful of, the pace that I moved at. I think everything worked out in a way that has led me to a place that I am extremely happy and fulfilled with where I'm at and where I'm going. I could not be more like feeling this sense of true peace and fulfillment and like confidence that the path that I am on is like where I'm meant to be. At this point in my life, the road ahead was so foggy and so nebulous, and I wanted just to be able to see through the fog and imagine something there. Because of the uncertainty, I wanted to jump to the end. I wanted to just like artificially create stability in a situation that wasn't at all stable for me. But now I see my road ahead, and granted, I don't know exactly all that's going to happen, but I feel in my gut, I feel in my bones that I am on the path. I've been down paths that have led me to dead ends, that have rerouted me down U-turns. And right now I feel the path in front of me to be infinite, and my whole life is like right ahead of me is what I feel like. So yeah, there's no need to rush when it comes to life. There's no need to have everything figured out at 24 years old. And it's such a relief to be here at 27 years old and to admit and embrace that I have so much ahead of me. Now, like this whole idea that you're where you need to be, again, I'm like fighting back on this notion that like there's anything that you need to do or that you're predestined to live. Like, this is where the universe is like mapping out for you to be. You're here because there's some divine thing that's saying like, this is what you need to be doing. Just because it was something that led me to a disempowering like state of mind where I felt like I didn't have control over my life. So I would rewrite that instead to say, you don't need to be anywhere else. You know, there's just no need to put need on it. You don't need to be here. You don't need to be in a place where you have everything figured out. You don't need to trust the path. Just trust yourself and trust that you are figuring it out. You're in the process.
Number 19 is that there's no use in working against your true nature. Astrology is interesting, right? Because it gives us a window, a language that we can use to understand certain aspects of our true nature. And sometimes people will get quite upset at what the cards have dealt them in terms of their true nature when they see that a certain placement is in its detriment, in its fall, they don't like a certain concentration of energy. They'll get up in arms about it. They'll get upset. They'll ask, is there any way that I can change this thing about myself? Sometimes you are who you are, and it's worth considering why you dislike an aspect of your true nature.
Yeah, that's funny because I thought that we had like something there when I started with, you know, there's no use in fighting against your true nature. And I was like, okay, there's something there of like embracing yourself. But then I brought up like how it was relevant to astrology and saying like, you know, your chart is your true nature and that's who you are, and people will get upset about it, but there's nothing they can do about it, basically, is like what it sounded like I was saying. And I do not agree with that at all. I don't think that you are a victim to your birth chart. I don't think that any chart or anything has the power to say who you are over who you identify yourself to be, and that nothing can tell you the direction that you are going to go or that you need to go versus the directions that you decide to take. But I will say that sometimes, you know, similar to the point that I brought up earlier, of like sometimes the qualities that are touted and valued in society are different from the qualities that are strongest in you. Sometimes the qualities that are strongest in you are not valued in society. I think like there's room for us to embrace those qualities in us that aren't necessarily valued in society. But then this is like a different point entirely. It's like there's no use in trying to be anybody different. You are just who you are, and that I don't agree with. But when we look at ourselves and we're maybe upset with certain qualities of ourselves, you know, instead of having that judgmental attitude towards like, oh, why am I not different? There's something to the tune of what I'm saying here of like trying to understand that part of yourself and maybe even love that part of yourself, nurture that part of yourself, essentially just like not be as judgmental towards the things that we wish that we would change. Instead of having an attitude of this needs to change, having more of an attitude of how can I understand this? How can I nurture this in a way that doesn't make it something that I have to dislike about myself? So yeah, rewriting this, instead of there's no use in going against your nature, how about nobody else can tell you who you are?
Number 20 comes straight from a Pinterest quote. Yes, I'm basic, and it is okay to do the right thing and still feel sad about it. Sometimes doing the right thing is bittersweet. Sometimes taking a step in the right direction hurts.
That is something I completely agree with. I'm looking at 24-year-old Nina and I'm like, you're going to learn that. You're going to learn that. This is 24 things I've learned in 24 years. No, this is some things you about to learn. Some of the most painful decisions in the moment are some of the best decisions that you can make for yourself. And Funny. Okay, so here, this video, I am just spitting out so many things that are, in my own twisted way, justifying my participation in this relationship with this partner who is abusive to me. But if this is around my 24th birthday, in a matter of weeks, I will make the decision to leave that relationship and leave that partner. Now, that was a decision that I had to make over and over and over again, because I would break up with him and then he would guilt me back into being with him, and variations on the same theme. But yeah, it's interesting to see a little preview into what happened after I filmed this video, where making that decision, I was really, really sad about it. It was really, really difficult for me. And that's why he was able to rope me back in. So I could have taken my advice at that point and, reminded myself that just because this decision makes me feel sad, makes me feel bad, makes me feel guilty, doesn't mean that it's not the right thing.
21 also comes from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and it is appreciate the differences in others. There's a part in the book where Stephen R. Covey is detailing a lunch that he had with a man and his wife where they were seeking his advice about their marriage. And they were just bickering and bickering. Finally, Stephen R. Covey was like, how did you guys ever make a baby, basically? And they were like, how do you think that we did? And he was like, well, I imagine that you appreciated each other's differences, which is exactly what happens when you're making a baby.
Yeah, so I'm not going to go as far as to disagree with Stephen R. Covey when he says that, we need to appreciate the differences in other people. But I'll just give you some of the context behind, again, this is one of those classic situations of me using something totally illogical to justify something totally illogical in my life. I would not want to be in a relationship with someone who is exactly like me. No way, no how. It also did me no favors to be in a relationship with somebody who was so different to me, where I had so much difficulty tapping into anger and entitlement. I was with someone who had an overabundance of anger and entitlement. So just another case of, some things just do not and cannot apply to abusive relationships. You don't need to force yourself to appreciate a difference in someone just because it's a difference. Some differences do not need to be appreciated. They need to be evaluated. I think that in order to even be in a position to remember that it's important to appreciate the differences in other people, you need to really know yourself. You really need to know who you are. You need to really be confident in your own qualities so that when someone's differences challenge you, you can look to see what in those qualities can be appreciated without losing yourself, without losing the qualities in you that are opposite that should also be appreciated.
Number 22 is a strong lesson for me, and that is it is okay to have boundaries. And to that effect, find people that align with your values, because mutuality is important. I, by nature, am a pretty accepting person, and a problem that comes up with that sometimes is that people can cross my boundaries. People can take advantage of my accepting and giving nature. And sometimes a difficulty that also comes up with being someone who prides themselves on being accepting, who finds it important to accept other people, is that I can feel guilty for putting up boundaries, for saying no to people, I guess. But I found that if you end up in relationships with people who don't align with your values, who don't align with your values of a relationship, don't have the same idea of what a friendship means, of what a romantic relationship means, of what any kind of partnership means, you're not going to experience mutuality. You're not going to get the most out of that relationship. So it's more important to be discerning in who you choose to be your friend than it is to be overly accepting when it comes to the success of that relationship, the success of that friendship or whatever partnership.
I'm like laughing and beaming over here because I talk about this so much. Boundaries are my jam. That's like what I talk about all the time. And like I'm under the impression here that this is like a new learning for me over the past like couple of years, but this is apparently something that I had learned at 24. There again is that difference between the awareness and the corrective experience to be able to actually find healing in that. But I'm actually starting to realize that what's like creating this like mismatch in what I'm saying here and what I knew I was going through in my relationship at the time is that in this section, I'm talking about an experience with a friend where I was learning all of this, identifying that I did not have the same values as that friend, and I understood all of these things of my personality because of this experience with this friend, but I hadn't quite like allowed myself to recognize that these were the exact same dynamics in my romantic relationship at the time. So that is really interesting. No notes, like, yes, boundaries are important. Let's keep that in the 27 things I've learned at 27.
Something that is very much something that I have learned in my 24 years, and that is that faith is my superpower. I am so grateful for my inherent ability to have faith, and that's on my Sagittarius moon.
Interesting. Faith is my superpower. I definitely believed this wholeheartedly, and I feel this on some level. I've had a tumultuous relationship with my spirituality over the past couple of years because of the things that have happened. So yeah, it's always been a characteristic of mine to like have faith that everything will work out and to be able to find the reason behind everything, to be able to find the value behind everything, to feel, you know, the energy of something bigger than myself in me and around me, to see the world as something more spiritual. But I think at this time in my life, I could have leaned a little less on just the faith that everything would work out and really put myself in the driver's seat a bit more. I'm still going to keep that. I'm still going to say faith is my superpower, but just like rock, paper, scissors, no power, no weapon is invincible to all other obstacles.
But the 24th thing on this list is that there is nothing wrong with me. Even sounds a little cocky coming out of my mouth, but I've just spent so much of my life thinking that there was something wrong with me. I think that astrology definitely gave me an insight, especially reading for other people and getting involved in other people's charts and perspectives in general, that allowed me to realize that I am not alone in the things that I struggle with, and therefore the things that I deal with are relatively normal and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Yeah. There is nothing wrong with me. Until I found astrology, I really did think that I was alone in so many things that I was experiencing. I felt always so different, so like, yeah, just different. I felt like I had a particular set of burdens on my shoulders that I didn't see anyone else going through. So of course it was easy to think like, oh, there's something wrong with me. And it is true that getting into astrology and seeing the dynamics that are difficult in my chart pop up in other people's charts, I could identify that those struggles were not indicative of something being defective with me. And so I still stand by this. How could I not? I don't live, or I don't want to live in a paradigm where I think that there is something like wrong with me. Well, I mean, my immune system doesn't function in the way that it should. Does that make something wrong with me? In that way, there is something wrong with me, for sure. My immune system is defective, so does that make me defective? I guess, like, maybe the new take on this is that everybody is worth it. No amount of flaws or defects that a person may have, no amount of difficulties that a person might face, nothing can take away from the inherent value of a person, of a life. Nothing can render a person useless. No one is beyond their dignity to life. Some of the people that I was around during this time had some mindsets that were quite different, that really thought that some people should just die. Like, truly some awful things were said. Like, there were people in my life who were enthused by the idea of a global pandemic because they thought that the population should be culled. I had a friend around this time who had a habit of saying, we should just burn down nursing homes because what's the point of keeping those people alive anyway? Yeah, I'm not kidding when I say that I was not very discerning about the people that I would let in my life. And frankly, Los Angeles is a crazy place. And that's where I lived at the time. But yeah, I'm generally moving away from even categorizing things as good or bad, defective, whatever. Because as much as my immune system, you could say, is yes, defective, my own body is intent on attacking itself, literally against my own will. I am trying to kill myself. That's pretty crazy. That's pretty cuckoo bananas. But there is a way to look at all of that as a bad thing. There might be a way to look at all of that as a good thing, but it just is what it is. And I can find the value in having that be a part of my experience. So there's no real use in good, bad, something right with me, something wrong with me. So that closes out the 24 things that I thought that I had learned at 24 years old. So I've amended what needed to be amended. I've added what I thought needed to be added. I've co-signed the things that I thought were just fine the way they were when I said them 3 years ago. Now, to bring this from 24 things that I learned at 24 to 27 things that I've learned at 27, number 25, something that I've been learning over the past few years and that definitely is relevant as I watch this back, is the power of embracing humility. Here I am at 24 years old talking as if I know everything about the world. And I guess I might just have been a little bit of a victim of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where I was so young, I didn't know what I didn't know, so I thought that what I knew was everything that needed to be known. And like I said, I felt the need to have it all figured out and to present not just to the world, but to myself, that I had it all figured out. And what I am learning in just embracing humility, and generally not just humility, but I have found so much relief in actively making it a point of pointing out my mistakes. Obviously, I just did that. I am here pointing out all of the mistakes that I made. And that is not something that I could have done at that age. There was the pressure to have had it all figured out. But the only way that you even get any closer to having it all figured out is by acknowledging your mistakes, acknowledging where you've been wrong. So I thought that I needed to be beholden to the same path, to the same relationships, to the same career path, to the same life philosophy. And that was what I was going to ride out to the bitter end. So I felt like I needed to defend that, right? And if I didn't, it was a failure. It was an ego hit. It was maybe humiliating on some level to me. So to be able to be humble in admitting that I'm wrong, I'm able to let go of those mistakes from the past. And it's such a weight off my shoulders, and it opens up so many more possibilities in the future. Then number 26 is the power of embracing aging. I'm sure that some of you, and certainly me in the future, will roll my eyes at thinking that 27 is aging. And it's not. It's so crazy because I felt so much more like I was turning this big scary age when I turned 24 than now turning 27. And it's because being in the entertainment industry like I was at the time, there is such this pressure to have a career at a very young age, because as a woman, your capacity to work, your value is expiring by the second. So it's a really like scary thing to age in that industry. So much of my value I felt was hinged upon my youth and the things that went along with it, like the naivety, the sweetness, the innocence, the whatever, which was just like a perception that people had of me that really like diminished the true depth of my personhood. But I felt like it was something that I needed to play into, that youth, that innocence, that naivety. And so it was really intimidating to feel, in general, in many areas, my value expiring as I aged. But now I fully, wholeheartedly believe that I will be at my prime as a grandmother when I have learned so much more and I have created a family and I can live my life doing the grandma things that I enjoy doing now, like crocheting and drinking tea and reading. It's so funny how I couldn't imagine my life being valuable after the age of like 30, and now I'm 3 years away from 30, and I'm like, bring it on, and more, and many more. I'm 27 years old and pursuing my bachelor's degree for the first time because out of high school, I thought that I didn't have time to go to college if I wanted to progress in my career. You are never too old for anything, probably. Like there's a group of people, like a club of people over 60 skydiving for the first time. I'm not too old for college. I'm not too old to start a new career. I look forward to getting older. And then 27, I hadn't really thought about this like prior to just about now in terms of like what I would share for the video, but it has been like floating around in my mind over the past few years, I guess. I think sometimes we have it like really backwards about sharing our pain with the people who hurt us. Maybe this comes from like the playground where when someone would bully you, your parents or the teachers would say like, don't let them know that they hurt you because that's what they really want. That's what makes them happy. That's what they are trying to do, is they're trying to hurt you. So if you show that they didn't hurt you, then it will discourage them from continuing to hurt you. But I think most people who are adults, who have grown past the schoolyard phase, when they hurt you, it's not because they have the intention of hurting you. Most harm is not done with the intent to harm. It's done with different motivations that unfortunately lead to harm. And for that reason, in most cases, you don't want to keep from letting people know that they harmed you. Repair, including apology, is one of the most important and maybe even underrated necessities in life in order to make the most of our relationships with our loved ones. And this is something that I'm learning recently because, as sad as it is to say and as dramatic as it might be to say, I had a couple of relationships with the odd and rare person who, in hurting me, it was actually their intention to hurt me. So I had to unlearn the natural process that I had to react and to express and confirm my hurt and cut those people off from me, cut those people off from being able to emotionally influence me, because it became as clear as day that it was actually their intention to hurt me. So that's some learning that came from several relearnings. And that's something that Lola learned too, or she's learning it at least. I'm trying to teach her because she was shot in the head with a BB gun before she was adopted. So someone was actually trying to hurt her. But I'm trying to tell her that when someone out in the hallway is rustling a grocery bag or walks too loud, it doesn't mean that they're trying to hurt her. And I'm a lot like Lola sometimes. Well, with that, those are 27 things that I have learned at 27 years old. Thank you for coming along on these live chats with me. I would love to hear what you thought of any one of my 27 points, what you thought of this video, some things that you have learned over how many years of life that you have been on this planet as yourself. As always, there's a link in my description to my website, ninabcoaching.com, if you are interested in booking a free 15-minute coaching consultation with me to see how I might be able to support you as your life coach if you're looking to hire a life coach at this point in your life. If you're interested in some of the critiques that I had around the spiritual community that naturally sort of came up in this video, then you might want to check out this video on my astrology channel called My Gripes with the Spiritual Community / Industry. And if you're interested to know more about my journey of healing after an abusive relationship, you can check out this video on healing and falling in love again after an abusive relationship. But that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to speak to you again very, very soon. Bye.